Good morning. Imagine, if you will, that it's a Wednesday afternoon, you're down in town, and purely by chance, as you're turning left into Albion Place, you bump into an old friend, someone you've not seen for perhaps 10 or 15 years, but who's up in Leeds, at least until the weekend. Sadly, neither of you got much time. You're trying to get to your car before clocking up another hour will cost you an arm and a leg. And he's running late for an appointment. Anyway, as you do these days, you swap phone numbers. And as you're doing so, you suggest that, when he's finished whatever it is he's doing, and if he's got nothing planned, why don't he pop round to see you? Why don't he pop round to your place for dinner? That sounds great, doesn't it? It'd be brilliant to catch up after all those years. However, as he dashes off towards Boar Lane, it suddenly strikes you that although you first met this guy at secondary school more than maybe 30 or 40 years ago, you've never actually had a meal together. You've never met up or sat down in a restaurant or a cafe, and you've never worked your way through a menu. In fact, when you think about it, you've absolutely no idea about what type of food he likes, and you've just invited him for dinner. What if he's a veggie? Worse still, what if he's a vegan? What if he's allergic to wheat? Well, I suppose that rules out pasta. Or mushrooms. Yeah, that scuppers a nice casserole. To cheese or to nuts. And what if those sulfites in that cheap red that you drink? What if they knot his stomach and he ends up dashing off to the loo? You see what I'm getting at? A casual invitation. Hey, why don't you pop round? Why don't you come and see us? Come round for something to eat. It suddenly turns into a ginormous sort of just gastronomic dilemma. So what do? Well, as I see it, you've only got two options. Option one is that you get on your phone and you call him back and you share your concerns and say, look, what would you like to eat? But you can't do that because, by now he'll be in his meeting. So option two is that when you pick your car up, you call in at Sainsbury's and you buy, prepare and cook so much food that if he does turn out to be the world's pickiest eater, you'll still be able to offer him something he likes. Now, I'm not saying that was a situation that Martha faced when she invited Jesus' party for dinner. Excuse me. But it could have been. Who knows what she had in her kitchen cupboards? Her invitation was certainly spontaneous, as we see in verse 38. It says, as Jesus and his disciples were on their way, he came to a village where a woman called Martha opened her home to him. And as for the menu, in an old children's Bible story book I've still got, it clearly says, and I quote, so Martha continued to make many trips back and forth, carrying starters, main courses and desserts, and clearing away tray after tray of empty plates, bowls and cups. You see, Martha was a doer. And believe you me, I know what it's like to live with a doer. Martha wanted everything to be right. She'd invited friends for dinner, and she wasn't prepared to leave anything to chance. Her sister Mary, meanwhile, was very different. I'm not saying she didn't want to please her guests or to make them feel welcome. But for her, the chance to take time out and to sit at Jesus' feet, that was an opportunity just too good to be missed. Not surprisingly, this annoyed Martha, and it annoyed her so much so that instead of just having a quiet word with Mary and saying, hey, come on, don't you think can't you lend me a hand in the kitchen? She spoke directly to Jesus. Verse 40 says, Lord, don't you care that my sister has left me to do all the work by myself? Tell her to help me. Now, quite how Martha reacted to this, it isn't recorded. But I would imagine that she wasn't too pleased, particularly when, after putting in all that effort, Jesus added, because Mary has chosen what is better, and it will not be taken away from her. Now, I know that's what Jesus said, and who am I to query it? But I suspect that what he was getting at isn't as clear-cut as we often make out. I certainly don't think that this one comment was intended to cut society in two, and that 2,000 years on, we need to think of ourselves as being either a Mary or a Martha. Now, I think what Jesus was implying was that above everything else, spending time with him is the most important thing. The way I read this passage isn't that Jesus is telling Martha off. I'm sure he enjoyed a lovely meal, and he and his friends were probably delighted that they'd been waited on hand and foot. No, I think what Jesus is doing here is sort of lovingly reminding Martha not to get so consumed in the busyness of life that doing, rather than simply being, becomes the be-all and end-all of their friendship. So let me suggest that there are three things that we can draw from this story. Firstly, that while it might not be the most important part of the narrative, what Martha did, Martha's hospitality, that's both her initial invitation and then all that time and effort she put into accommodating her guests, that was important. Then as now, eating together, coming together and sharing with friends, well, it is, as we learned last week from Shelley's message about Jesus the chef. It's important. And talking with and listening to one another is vital if we're going to build and retain friendships. Secondly, and as I've just said, I honestly don't believe that we have to be either one or the other. You see, there aren't just two options. We don't have to be a Mary or a Martha. We'd like, if you like, with one always getting it right and the other just always missing the mark. You've only got to look at your screens when we all come together on Zoom to see this and to recognise how ridiculous it would be if it were expected that we were all to fit into just one of two different boxes. And thirdly, and I think this is the real crux of the issue, whoever we are and however we're wired, the one thing that none of us must let slip is the amount of time that we spend speaking with and listening to Jesus. So the next time someone asks you if you're a Mary or a Martha, don't waste time trying to justify yourself. Just tell them straight. Say, I'm neither. I'm a mixture of both. Tell them, yes, there are days when like Martha, you do spend all your time dashing around like a scolded cat. And yes, there are times when like Mary, you value nothing more than, as it were, sitting quietly at Jesus' feet. You see, that's what's so good about God. Yes, in telling us about Mary and Martha, the Bible, as it often does employ opposites to emphasize a particular point. But beyond that, like when it comes to actually doing and or being, God sees you and I not as an either or, but as a unique and treasured individual. Amen.